Welcome to Smart Ancient. Imagine a hunter standing in the middle of a vast plain of withered grass, somewhere in what is now southern Africa, at a time approximately 60,000 years ago, before anyone on Earth had any concept of naming eras or centuries, where a herd of enormous herbivores is leisurely grazing exactly 50 paces away from his hiding place. While the wind direction is temporarily on the hunter's side, and in his hand is a long wooden spear with a sharpened tip that has been fire-hardened, the most powerful and perfected weapon that every generation of ancestors in his lineage has ever managed to create. But the life or death problem here is that the hunter must find a way to reduce that 50-pace distance to only about 15 paces, because 15 paces is roughly the distance from the gate to the front door of a modern house, precisely the maximum throwing range at which a spear, propelled by the muscular strength of the arm, can hope to strike a target with enough destructive force, and wild animals on the savannah never need much of a reason to panic and flee. Because just a sudden shift in the wind, carrying the smell of a human body, a shadow accidentally passing through the corner of the lead animal's eye, or the faintest crunch of a pebble slipping beneath a bare foot can be enough to send the entire herd into a frantic stampede, disappearing hundreds of meters away before the hunter can even place his second foot on the ground. Meaning there will be no meat for the hunter's dinner, nor for the children and relatives waiting anxiously at the camp. And this was the brutal mathematical problem that governed human survival for most of the length of our species' history. Either close that deadly distance, or accept returning empty-handed with a painfully rumbling stomach, until at some point in that deep past, one branch of the human population discovered an extraordinary way to launch a deadly projectile tearing through space without having to take another dangerous step themselves, simply by using a bent wooden stave combined with a tightly stretched cord, a single idea that would form the basis of the bow and arrow. An invention considered one of the technological turning points with the deepest and most far-reaching influence, one that profoundly changed the fate of humanity, raising the fundamental question of how our ancestors evolved from throwing a piece of wood by hand to constructing a mechanical device capable of storing and releasing its own mechanical energy. A fascinating scientific story in which modern experimental research has shattered no small number of common misconceptions. And before archaeologists could ask who first invented the bow, they had to confront the harsh reality that organic materials such as wood, cords twisted from sinew and fibers, and feathers almost never survive tens of thousands of years buried in damp soil. Meaning that the answer concerning the true age of the bow and arrow could not come from wood, but had to be decoded from nearly indestructible stone points, where archaeologist Marlies Lombard of the University of Johannesburg spent many years studying tiny, sharp stone fragments excavated from Sibudu Cave in South Africa by applying the tip cross-sectional area method, meaning carefully measuring the width and thickness of a stone point at its widest section based on an extremely rigorous physical argument rather than vague speculation, because a hand-thrown spear must have a large and heavy point in order to accumulate enough momentum to penetrate the thick skin and muscle of prey through the force of the arm's swing. While spear-thrower-launched darts or hand-thrown projectiles fall into an intermediate size range, whereas an arrowhead must be extremely light and slender in order to fly quickly, travel far, and maintain a stable trajectory through the air, leading the stone points at Sibudu Cave to fall precisely within the characteristic size range of arrowheads. While under optical microscopy, they also displayed clear impact fracture patterns caused by collisions at extremely high velocity, as well as chemical traces of adhesive compounds used to attach the stone points to wooden shafts, allowing Lombard and her colleague Lynn Wadley to publish a groundbreaking study in the journal Antiquity in 2010. Dating these stone arrowheads to approximately 64,000 years ago, a revolutionary discovery that pushed the origin of the bow and arrow deep into the Middle Stone Age of Africa, tens of thousands of years before modern Homo sapiens migrated to the European continent. And remarkably, the physical law governing arrowhead size appears to show a universal convergence across the globe, because regardless of culture, even among groups that had never encountered one another, the aerodynamics of a fast-flying arrow imposed the same strict design limitations, something further demonstrated when at Mandarin Cave in southern France, researchers analyzing microscopic wear traces on stone points found evidence that early modern humans in Europe used bows and arrows approximately 54,000 years ago, creating two archaeological points separated by thousands of miles and 10,000 years yet bearing the same technological signature, encouraging archaeologist John Shea of Stony Brook University. a leading specialist in reconstructing ancient weapons, to argue that the bow and arrow may have been the result of independent parallel invention by multiple human groups when their cognitive and tool-making abilities reached a certain evolutionary threshold, with each population independently discovering a solution to the same harsh survival problem in its own environment, rather than the technology being a single invention created by one individual and slowly transmitted across the world. However, archaeological specialists have always maintained scientific caution when debating whether every small stone point was necessarily an arrowhead, showing that the historical picture is still being refined with every new discovery. And once we accept the antiquity of this technology, we must explain why the bow represented such an extraordinary mechanical leap, because its secret lies not merely in the speed of flight, but in a completely different principle of energy conversion, where a hand-thrown spear obtains all of its kinetic energy from a single swinging movement of the arm. An action that consumes enormous amounts of calories, rapidly causes fatigue, suffers a serious decline in accuracy as distance increases, and most importantly, requires a large and noisy bodily movement that can easily alert prey immediately before the throw, whereas the bow operates like a genuine elastic energy storage machine, in which the archer does not throw anything at all but uses pulling force to slowly bend the bow over 1 or 2 seconds, gradually loading the effort of the muscles into the wooden fibers just like a compressed spring stores elastic potential energy, and then when the bowstring is released, all of that patiently accumulated force is instantly released and transferred directly into the lightweight arrow shaft within a fraction of a second, allowing the archer to no longer be limited by the instantaneous swinging force of a single arm, but only by the amount of force they can patiently load into the bow beforehand, while completely separating the slow, quiet energy loading stage from the lightning-fast launching stage, giving the hunter the ability to remain concealed and virtually invisible to the prey. Yet constructing a functional bow was an enormous cognitive challenge because the bow and arrow was not a single tool but a complex technological system consisting of multiple components, including a wooden bow stave with the flexibility and toughness required to bend without breaking, demanding deep knowledge of different tree species, how to select the grain of the wood, and techniques for drying and conditioning it. The bowstring required specialized rope-making technology using plant fibers or animal sinew capable of enduring extreme tensile shock loads, an area in which popular retellings have often exaggerated or distorted the discovery of a Neanderthal twisted cord fragment from Abri du Maras in France as being 90,000 years old. Whereas Bruce Hardy's official research published in Scientific Reports in 2020 indicated that its actual date was between 41,000 and 52,000 years ago, nevertheless still proving that cordage technology appeared very early before modern humans had exclusive possession of this skill, just as the famous Schöningen wooden spears in Germany. Excavated by Hartmut Thieme and once dated to 300,000 years ago, are now estimated by newer analyses to potentially be as much as 350,000 or 400,000 years old, confirming that humans and other ancient human species experimented with projectile weapons for hundreds of millennia before perfecting the bow. In addition, the bow and arrow system required a perfectly straight and balanced shaft, a sharp point firmly attached using a complex adhesive cooked from tree resin combined with minerals and ash, requiring a multi-step chemical preparation process, as well as feathers carefully cut and symmetrically attached to the rear in order to provide aerodynamic stability. This complexity inspired archaeologist Miriam Heidel at the University of Tübingen to develop the cognogram method to quantify the number of mental steps and the degree of long-term planning required by a tool, showing that while a simple flaked stone may require only a few short-term mental operations, a complete bow and arrow set demands a multi-layered sequence of planning extending across time, with multiple branches of action that must be carried out long before final assembly, such as drying the wood for months and aging the adhesive overnight, demonstrating a brain capable of superior abstract thinking and remembering goals far into the future. This convergence is further reinforced when anthropologist Dietrich Stout of Emory University used fMRI brain scanning technology on people making tools and discovered that the more complex the tool-making process, the more strongly activated the inferior frontal gyrus, a region overlapping with the brain's language and grammar processing center, demonstrating that constructing a sophisticated machine such as a bow required not only manual dexterity, but also evolved alongside the development of complex language, Because skills involving invisible knowledge, such as why one piece of wood should be chosen instead of another, how long the wood must be allowed to dry, or what the standard twist of a braided cord should be, cannot be transmitted merely by observing outward actions, and instead require a teacher to explain abstract conditions that exist in the future, but not yet in the present. And once the core idea of the bow had become firmly established in the human mind, it began to branch and evolve brilliantly according to different geographical and cultural contexts across the continents, where on the vast grasslands of Central Asia during the centuries before Christ, nomadic bowyers created the composite bow by attaching layers of animal horn on the inner face, where maximum compression occurs, and animal sinew on the outer face, where maximum tensile stress occurs, around a flexible wooden core, producing a bow that was compact in size, exceptionally efficient at storing energy, and extremely convenient for the mounted archers of the steppe, the predecessors of the battle-hardened armies of the Mongol Empire, who could ride at full gallop while firing numerous accurate arrows every minute. Within this cultural world of steppe archers, we also preserve a fascinating linguistic fossil, because the word toxic in modern English actually derives from the ancient Greek word toxikon, meaning something related to the bow, which itself comes from toxon, meaning bow, a term that linguists believe the Greeks borrowed from the language of the nomadic Scythians, who specialized in using poison-tipped arrows, so that today the word for poison found on medical and chemical warning labels still carries within it the trace of ancient steppe arrows that few people would ever suspect. Meanwhile, in medieval England, people developed a completely different approach with the longbow, made from a single yew-stave as tall as a person, with an enormous draw weight beyond the ability of most modern archers, creating tremendous mechanical stress that permanently deformed the bone structures of the forearms and spines of archers. Distinctive skeletal pathological marks that anthropologists have clearly identified on the remains recovered from the wreck of the warship Mary Rose, which sank in 1545. In China, and later spreading westward, the crossbow emerged as a mechanical solution that completely separated the process of drawing the bowstring from the act of aiming and firing, allowing even a new recruit, after only a few days of brief training, to shoot down an armored aristocratic knight who had spent his entire life training in martial arts, creating such a profound threat to the feudal order and the knightly class that in 1139, the Second Lateran Council under Pope Innocent II issued an absolute prohibition against using crossbows against fellow Christians, calling the weapon brutal and detestable in the sight of God. In the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa, sand hunters combined the small bow with an extraordinarily sophisticated form of natural chemistry by extracting a blood-dissolving toxin from the larvae of the Diamphidia beetle and carefully applying it to the wooden shaft immediately behind the arrowhead rather than coating the sharp tip, in order to ensure maximum safety for the hunter's hands while carrying it. Yet the bow and arrow was not the inevitable choice of every civilization, because indigenous Australians, despite sustained contact with bow-using peoples in the Northern Islands, continued to remain loyal to the traditional Woomera spear thrower, which was perfectly suited to their local environment and ecosystem without requiring them to bear the additional manufacturing burden of the bow and arrow, demonstrating that technology is a conditionally adaptive choice rather than a mandatory evolutionary pathway. And when we look at the modern world today, we realize that the principle of elastic energy storage discovered by the ancient bow has never disappeared from civilized life. From modern compound bows with eccentric pulley systems used by Olympic athletes to suspension springs in every automobile traveling on the road, delicate mainsprings in mechanical watches, or diving boards at swimming pools. All of them operate according to exactly the same purely mechanical principle that the Middle Stone Age hunter discovered more than 60,000 years ago, patiently loading energy into a deformed material and releasing all of that energy in a decisive instant. Although the materials used to construct them have changed dramatically from dry branches to carbon fiber and titanium alloys, the original core idea has remained completely intact through the test of time, bringing to a close our journey into understanding how humans invented the bow and arrow, not through a random flash of inspiration, but through the grand intersection of abstract thinking, the evolution of language for transmitting knowledge, and the ability to master the physical laws of the universe in order to permanently change the mathematics of survival. And if you enjoy journeys that decode history, archaeology, and deep science like this, remember to press the like button, Share the video with your friends, and especially don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the exciting content we release every week.